This brings us back to the point of distinguishing theoretically the difference between private ownership or property and individual. Capital, under the current bourgeois ideological framework of political economy or economics, is that which realizes a return, the economic stock used or expected when used to return a net profit over what was invested. What is problematic about this is that it allows for an analytic or formal analysis that ignores how the value was returned and generated. This also can grow into the assumption that value is produced based on a cheat or subjective method of analyzing value, based totally on supply and demand or willingness to pay more or less for a commodity or product. In actuality, the value is created by a difference, and not the difference between what a seller is willing to pay versus what a buyer is willing to pay. It is the difference specifically between what it costs to renew labor or labor power, that is, a person's availability or ability to work, and the total value produced by labor. This is very easily seen if we review the examples of capital as a social relation in comparison to slavery, or feudalism even. A slave master must only give to the slave what is necessary for them to have mental and physical capabilities to repeat whatever task is necessary to return goods and services required from the master. The same applies to the worker in regard to the capitalist. This not only explains itself how value is generated, but digging deeper it also explains the convenience of how the bourgeois theory arises. Whereas with the slave relation, it's very easy to picture a slave producing for a master. Capital is masked by the generalized production method applied to commodities. Under capitalism, an individual group of slaves doesn't produce for an individual slave-owning family. An entire class of slaves, which can be referred to as the proletariat, produce for the entire ruling class of the bourgeoisie, as well as everyone in between. The slaves of prior times produce for themselves as well, but the clear-cut class dynamics and bondage to a specific location further simplified the view of the relation. In today's society, workers are spread across the entire world. It thus takes another roundabout simplification and thought to be able to picture what is conveniently masked by the dynamics of capital. One must notice that what was done before on an individual level, class to class, is now done socially from class to class, whereas before, everything, or at least a great deal, was produced by an individual set of slaves for an individual master. It is now split into every commodity, or at least a great deal of commodities being produced by different groups of workers spread across the entire world. And this includes products that represent basic needs, but it expands to products that represent the highest of luxury. This also includes workers who get paid next to nothing to workers who get paid enough to partake in some luxuries themselves. This wide span in social and economic standards and individual existing in hard to define positions within society helps further obfuscate the capital relation. What is happening in capitalist society is society-wide allocation of value. In contrast, to restate the point, under previous relations, it is easy to see the individualistic nature of production for the individual slave to master. This is especially the case given the significance of products being produced as values based on the ability to use, as opposed to commodities manifesting themselves as values based on the ability to exchange within the medium of money. And it is this social allocation of value that allows for ignoring objective value so easily, because what we see at the end of the day is value in money represented in a commodity. So an individual capitalist can very easily espouse the view that it is their own money going in and as their commodities coming out. This is totally ignoring the social relation of production. Also, given the products are produced socially but nonetheless produced, the particular case of an individual capitalist can have the value ignored. This is where it gets sort of complicated, but what happens is the social production equals a social allocation of resources. There is no rule or law outside of the theoretical understanding that says value must reflect actual value. So as opposed to the actual value created with the production of particular commodities, the value can be added up into a total, and thus value can be allocated from that total. To illustrate this on a particular level, a capitalist might pay, say, $100 for a set of commodities, means of production or labor, or just as an investment. The result might be that the stock sells for like $200. At the end, profiting $100. But now, just think of it as a scale of millions or billions or trillions to be realistic. If it only costs hundreds of thousands initially, returning millions, there's a lot of money to play with arbitrarily, especially taking into consideration investors, merchants, managers, etc. Or again, taking into consideration supply and demand. What once had an obvious value after sharing in the collective pie among the owners and their kin This could very easily lead to someone wasting thousands on a piece of trash and thus tarnishing value. The key reiterating point is the factor of social production and generalized production of commodities, which is an integral part of capitalist society as discussed earlier, and this is completely different from how society would have functioned in previous times. This shift from individual to social production also allows for the bourgeois ideological framework to be built with regard to ownership. If things were produced individually, it would follow very simply that the fruits of the production would be due to that individual. The mask of value, commodities, and money easily, with the ignoring of the social relation, allows for ownership to jump from slaves or land to money, which is a form of capital. In the same way that the lord owned the land or the slave owner owned the slaves, and they both owned the means of production and resulting products, the capitalist owns and controls the capital going in and the capital coming out. This leads into the ideological conceptualization of private property, which is and will become important in any discussion of socialism and communism. Private property, taken as individual property of antiquated times, is one thing. Taking it as privatization of social production, which it actually is, currently taking place, is another. The individual owns the slaves, owns the plantation, and owns the goods and services produced. Now the bourgeoisie as owning class carry an individual approach to the generalized production of commodities, despite the fact that the production has been socialized. This is an easy explanation for why even lower class individuals are attracted to this ideology. If one hunts, fishes, farms, fixes one's own stuff, and so on, one might adopt quite the individualistic ideological framework, an ideology well suited to apply that same individualistic attitude unknowingly to a socialized framework of which one is ignorant. This also leads into another reason why it is problematic to define capitalism in terms of ownership of the means of production. Besides the fact that there is also ownership of resources and control over production, distribution, government, police, armies, and so on, the same ownership can be easily linked to individual ownership when not distinguished on the basis of social relation of production and overall functioning of society. The point to take is the difference between an individual or a small group. This is regardless of whether we're dealing with a person who's alone on the frontier, a farming family by themselves, or a plantation with slaves. These individuals or groups allocating to themselves what is produced by their own labor is different from the allocation of socially produced resources to and by a group or individuals. To close, I hope this suffices as a decent enough explanation to what capitalism and capital are. As well, I hope I can provide a better understanding of how these terms function within our current ideological framework. I'll try to continue soon with either what is communism and socialism, or with another series of topics. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, follow, and comment. If you have any questions, please ask. If you have any comments on the production quality, the video, the audio, or anything discussed within the video, please ask, and stay on the lookout for more.